In the walled city of Viridian, where cobblestones echoed with the clatter of hooves and the whispers of courtiers, Lady Isla stood before her mirror, defiance burning in her chest. At 20, she was a storm wrapped in silk, her gown of emerald green cut daringly low, its sleeves tight against her arms, a stark rebellion against the modesty expected of a noblewoman. A noble lady's dress must preach moderation and modesty, the priests often said, condemning low necklines as immoral, but Isla cared little for sermons. She saw them as chains disguised as lace. Downstairs, guests arrived for the Duke's masquerade, a gathering where alliances were forged and reputations made or broken. Her mother, Lady Eleanor, intercepted her in the courtyard, her face tight with anxiety. "Change, Isla," she hissed, clutching a high-necked velvet dress of deep burgundy. "You shame us before the entire court. A noblewoman's virtue is her veil, and you cast yours aside like rags." Isla's cheeks flushed. "I am not your doll to dress for display," she snapped. Around them, servants froze. A visiting baron's son turned away, feigning disinterest. In that moment, humiliation curdled into rage. Without thought, Isla leaned forward and spat squarely on her mother's cheek. The courtyard fell silent. In medieval Europe, spitting on another, especially on the face, was a global sign of contempt, hatred, and profound disrespect, a symbolical regurgitation of all bonds. 16. For a daughter to do so to her mother was unthinkable, a rupture of the sacred order. Lady Eleanor stood motionless for a heartbeat, then two. Her eyes, once pleading, hardened into flint. Reaching for the riding crop hanging by the stable door, a leather whip used more for discipline than horses, she raised it high. "If you will not wear grace," she said, voice trembling with fury and grief, "you shall learn its price." Crack! The lash struck Isla's shoulder, tearing through silk and skin. A second blow followed, then a third, each one witnessed by wide-eyed servants and stunned nobles. Public shaming was a cornerstone of medieval justice, designed not just to punish, but to inflict emotional torment and social humiliation as a deterrent to others. 6. In that moment, Isla was no longer a lady. She was a lesson. The aftermath was swift. Whispers spread through Viridian like plague. Suitors withdrew. The Duke's household barred her from future gatherings. Confined to her chamber, Isla was made to wear rough sackcloth and fast for 3 days, a penance meant to scour her pride. Meanwhile, Eleanor received quiet nods of approval from elder matrons. "You did what was necessary," they murmured. A mother's duty is to correct, even with severity, but in the stillness of night, Eleanor wept. She had raised her hand not in cruelty, but in terror that her daughter's rebellion would exile her from the only world that offered women protection, the gilded cage of nobility. Weeks passed. Then came news. A fever swept the lower town, and the apothecary's herbs ran dry. Isla, remembering her childhood lessons in healing, slipped out at dawn. Using her knowledge of willow bark and yarrow, skills her mother had insisted she learn, she tended to the sick, her sackcloth stained with sweat and care. She spoke gently, listened patiently, and for the first time, wielded her will not as a weapon, but as a balm. Eleanor watched from a distance, heart aching. One evening, she found Isla mending a torn family banner, the very one that had hung above their hearth for generations. Without a word, Elino sat beside her and threaded a needle dot. An apology passed between them. None was needed. When the next court gathering arrived, Isla chose a gown of deep blue, modest in cut, yet rich in hue, its sleeves wide and graceful, its neckline high but not severe. She wore it not in submission, but in understanding that grace was not the enemy of strength, but its companion, and though the memory of the spit and the whip would linger like a scar, it became a silent covenant between mother and daughter. A reminder that even the deepest wounds can teach the truest lessons.